Welcome to my presentation.
My name is Ralf Böhme. I'm a member of the Samba team and I work for Cernet.
The title of my presentation
is The Road to the New Samba VFS. So, today while recording this presentation, the final version of Samba 4.15 is about to be released in 1 week. So SDC is 2 weeks away. So at the time you're going to watch this presentation, Samba 4.15 will already be released for a week.
So there is a big change upcoming in this version 4.15, which is a modernized and improved virtual file system.
VFS. So in our release notes, we've put that under new features and changes. The effort to modernize Samba's VFS interface is complete, and Samba 4.15 ships with a modernized VFS designed for the post-SMB1 world. In this presentation, I want to take a deep dive into the technological underlying changes that we have implemented and explain the reasons why we did this. This has been an ongoing effort for quite a few years, initially driven by Jeremy Allison. And the idea was standardizing path-based file system syscalls on the add variants. So for example, using openadd instead of open. And using file handles instead of paths as often as possible. So for example, using FSTAT instead of stat. Now the question is, and there are actually two of them, and I will try to give you an answer. Why did we do this and how did we get there in the end? So let's start with some history. SMB1 FSTAT, the pervasive use of paths. So in SMB1, most metadata operations, getting and setting metadata on files and directories, can be done on paths. Now the problem is path processing is complex and slow. The core function in Unix convert had more than 800 lines before we refactored it last year, plus several thousand lines of code and related helper functions. So it's a lot of code that does a lot of complex things. Charset conversion, mangling Windows incompatible paths, DFS paths, SMB1 previous versions paths, case insensitive semantics, named stream support, and probably more stuff. So paths are complex. Now, enter SMB2. SMB2 is a purely handle-based protocol. So the SMB2 create request takes a path name, but basically everything else in SMB2 operates on a file handle returned by SMB2 create, with just a few exceptions. For example, query info, query directory, or set info. Now, SMB1 has been depreciated since Samba 4.11. The world has moved away from SMB1, so did we as Samba, as the Samba project, where SMB1 is now disabled by default. It's not yet removed completely. It's used in tests, which is the reason why it's not yet removed in its entirety. Big parts of our test suite use SMB client library, which is only capable of using SMB1 protocol, and many tests are built on top of that. So we have to preserve SMB1 support as long as all those tests are not rewritten with a more modern SMB client library that supports SMB2. So the idea for doing this conversion was having a mostly handle-based VFS for the SMB2 world by streamlining the VFS interface to be mostly handle-based. So using SMB VFS FSTAT instead of SMB VFS STAT, and so on. That makes it a perfect match for the SMB2 protocol. So what could possibly go wrong? Now, looking at an overview of the different types of VFS functions that we have in the Samba VFS, you see that there are path-based VFS functions, path-based namespace changing functions, and handle-based but not allowed on upath file descriptors or file handle, and handle-based functions. Now, which are the ones that we need to worry about when making changes to VFS, especially as we're trying to convert from path-based VFS functions to handle-based? So it turns out that there are different technical solutions for converting those path-based functions to handle-based ones. And in total, there are 21 different path-based functions, 8 different path-based name-changing functions, and 8 handle-based functions not allowed on OPath file descriptors, to which we'll come back to that, what that means later on. So just looking at the number, so these are 37 VFS functions that needed to be modified and replaced in order to convert the Samba VFS to be purely handle-based. So in total, 37 VFS functions, and that's a lot of work, as we'll see. And it took a lot of work to convert all those. Now, continuing to looking at the problems that converting from path-based to handle-based brings, another problem is permissions when moving from path-based to handle-based. So, for example, the POSIX API for opening a file requires at least a read-only flag. So if you do a path-based stat on dir/file, you need X access right on dir. Now, replacing this stat with an FSTAT, you first need to open the file so that you can FSTAT it, which means you need read access on file. And obviously that's different. So you get different permission semantics. And oh, sorry, it looks like there is a dir/ missing here when opening the file, but the result is the same. So that you get different permission semantics. And to make it worse, opening a file with even with read-only triggers a kernel oplock break. So this breaks oplock support in Samba. Now, the solution to this is OPath. This is a Linux open flag available since Linux 2.6.39 from May 2011, and it will soon be available in FreeBSD 14 as well. So what does it do? it returns a file handle that acts as a mere path reference. And I coined the term pathref for referring to these handles in Samba. They don't require read access on the object or on the file, only X access on the parent directory. There are only a limited number of syscalls allowed, for example, FSTAT, fchangedir, utimesAdd, and basically syscalls that work at the file descriptor inode level. And those file descriptors can't be used for any sort of I/O. They can be used for as directory FD syscalls. Now, of course, this is Linux only and available soon in FreeBSD. So there's a fallback to openness root if OPath is not available on other systems. And these special root opened FDs are guarded, and access is only possible via special accessor functions. So the problem is that Samba needs more than FSTAT. Now Samba needs to read ACLs and extend attributes, but both can't be retrieved via OPath file handles. So the solution to that is use the proc self file descriptor trick, as can be seen in the example code down below. And this is Linux only fallback and not available on other systems, but that's not really a problem because in the end it's the same net result, because it means we're doing path-based access just exactly as we did before the VFS changes. So now, doing the changes in the VFS and standardizing on handle-based VFS calls instead of path-based calls, we have another problem. Due to the paths and path-based requests being used so heavily in the protocol, we have pervasive use of paths in the Samba code base. And we want to convert 21 path-based VFS functions that are used at several hundred places in the code base. And we will need to somehow pass the file handles to all those places, to all those callers that call the new handle-based VFS functions. So in all those places, we somehow have to have access to a file handle. And it even gets worse than that, because often the Samba high-level code degrades handles to path-based access in many places. So in theory, we have a handle at some place in the code, but use the path attached to the handle with the path-based VFS functions. Or we need to call a VFS function on the parent directory of a handle. And sometimes paths get passed to functions and not a handle, even though we have one. Now, looking at the ways how we actually get file handles in Samba, so we could think solving the previous problem of providing file handles in all those places. Maybe we just could create file handles when we need them, but the problem is creating file handle is a very expensive operation. Samba's internal file handle structure is of type struct file struct, and all variables pointing to objects of such types are typically called FSPs. Now, and those file handles, the FSPs, are returned by the VFS function SMB VFS create file, and this is the 1,000-pound gorilla of the Samba VFS function zoo. Internally, it calls SMB VFS open add to open the low-level FD. And then it goes through Samba's NTFS Windows emulation code. And this is very expensive. Now, what we did in Samba is we added a new helper function, which is called openadd pathref FSP. which basically skips the NTFS emulation logic. It just calls Samba VFS OpenAdd and returns, as mentioned before, so-called pathref FSPs, which, as a side note, they can be upgraded as a performance optimization to full FSPs. So we have a new function that basically is cheaper than the 1,000-pound gorilla Samba VFS crate file, but it's still too expensive to call it explicitly in all places in the code base where we're going to convert path-based VFS functions to handle-based VFS functions. So what can we do? So in Samba, client-supplied paths, so that means the paths that we receive over the SMB protocol from clients, are processed by the core function fileNameConvert. This returns a pointer to an object of type struct SMB filename, and variables of that type are typically called SMB_fname. So what we did was basically tweak fileNameConvert to internally call OpenAdd pathref FSP to create a handle on that path, and storing the resulting handle inside the struct SMB filename as SMB fname FSP, which means as a result, the whole code base has immediate access to file handles in all places where we previously were processing path-based SMB1 requests. Or in other places where we process paths with fileNameConvert, which is basically really only used for processing the client paths. Yeah. So this allowed converting the large code base to a handle-based VFS in a piecemeal fashion. So the team that worked on the design of all this, and a big thanks to everyone who was involved, was Stefan Metzmacher, Volker Lennecke, Jeremy Allison, and myself, and the team that over the years implemented all this was Samuel Cabrero and Jeremy Allison and myself. So a big thanks to everyone who was involved. And yeah, this is the end of my presentation. It's a bit unusual to have this presentation recorded, so please excuse if this is not perfect. If you have any question, please feel free to contact me via email or here in the chat. So thank you for listening. I have a link here to the Samba wiki, where there is a lengthy document explaining in more detail also the design and implementation of all this, which might be interesting for some of you. Okay, that's it. Thank you and goodbye.